Have you ever noticed that abandoned places aren't really empty? My name is Sylvie Beaumont. I'm a security guard for Heritage Quebec, contracted to monitor and protect abandoned historical sites across the province. For the past 3 years, I've been stationed at Fermont-sur-Lac, a former mining town in the Laurentian Mountains, about 250 kilometers northwest of Quebec City. My job is straightforward on paper. Patrol the site twice daily, check building integrity, document any vandalism or unauthorized access, monitor for theft of historical artifacts. Standard security work in a ghost town that officially closed in 1987 when the zinc mine played out and the company pulled everyone out within 6 months. Most people think guarding abandoned towns means sitting in a trailer watching monitors and chasing away occasional urban explorers. They don't understand that some places hold on to routines even after the people leave. Those buildings remember schedules. That certain towns never really stopped operating, they just stopped having living workers. And if you're assigned to guard one of these places long enough, you learn that the hardest part isn't keeping people out. It's learning when to ignore what's happening inside. If you stay until the end, I'll tell you about the shifts. Not my security shifts, I know those by heart. The other shifts. The ones that still run like clockwork even though the mine closed 37 years ago. The ones I hear every morning at 7 a.m. when shadows move through the streets in patterns that match old work schedules. The ones documented in logs kept by every guard who's worked here since 1987, each of us adding observations about phenomena that Heritage Quebec acknowledges in private but never officially reports. Because at Fermont-sur-Lac, something still treats this town like it's operating. Something still follows the work schedules. Something clocks in every morning and clocks out every evening. And my job isn't to stop it. That was tried by previous guards and it didn't end well. My job is to document it, respect it, and most importantly, stay out of its way during shift changes. I grew up in Trois-Rivières, on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River. My father was a construction supervisor. My mother managed a small hotel. I spent my 20s doing various security jobs, shopping malls, office buildings, event venues, before answering a posting from Heritage Quebec. They needed someone willing to work isolated historical sites, someone comfortable being alone for weeks at a time, someone who could handle the solitude of places where the nearest town might be an hour's drive away. The pay was excellent. The work sounded peaceful. And I was tired of dealing with drunk concertgoers and shoplifters. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be paid to essentially be alone with history. Fermont-sur-Lac fit that description. The town covers about 8 square blocks on the shore of Lac aux Ombres, Shadow Lake, named for how the surrounding mountains cast darkness across the water even at midday. At its peak in the 1960s and 70s, the town housed about 800 people working the zinc mine that tunneled deep into Mont Beaufort. There was a company store, a school, a church, worker housing, administrative buildings, and the mine head itself, a massive concrete structure with elevators descending into the mountain. When the ore ran out, the company Laurentian Mining Corporation made the decision to close rather than explore new veins. Too expensive. Too remote. Too many other mines produced cheaper zinc. They gave workers 6 months' notice. Paid relocation assistance. By December 1987, Fermont-sur-Lac was empty. The building stood intact, since the company hoped to someday sell the property. That never happened. Eventually, Heritage Quebec took ownership for historical preservation. They hire guards to prevent vandalism and maintain basic security until they can decide what to do with the site. I arrived in April at the end of my 3rd year with Heritage Quebec. I'd worked at 2 other sites, an abandoned fishing village on the Gaspé Peninsula and a defunct railway town near the Ontario border. Both had been quiet. Routine. This was supposed to be the same. My supervisor, Marc, met me at the site entrance. He'd worked as a guard here himself 5 years earlier. He looked tired, older than his 41 years. We spent 3 days doing orientation. He showed me the trailer I'd live in, a comfortable modular unit with power from a generator, propane heat, and satellite internet. Showed me the patrol routes, explained the filing system for incident reports, standard security contractor work. But on our last evening, as the sun set behind Mont Beaufort, he did something different. He pulled out a separate notebook, handwritten, multiple entries in different handwriting. "This isn't official," he said. "Heritage Quebec knows about it, but they don't acknowledge it in any formal way. Every guard who's worked here adds to this. You need to read it before I leave." The first entry was dated January 1988, written by the first guard stationed here after closure. It described sounds: footsteps on gravel paths at 7 a.m., doors opening and closing in the company store, voices muffled, indistinct, coming from the Minehead building. But when investigated, nothing. Empty buildings. No signs of entry. No evidence of people. The entry concluded: sounds follow work schedule. 7 a.m. arrival. Noon break. 5 p.m. departure. Do not attempt to interact. Do not enter buildings during active hours. I looked at Marc. Active hours? The mine's been closed since 1987. He didn't smile. The mine closed. The work didn't. You'll hear it. Everyone does. Usually within the first week. And you'll see them, the shadows. They follow the old schedules exactly. At 7 a.m., they come down from the housing area and move toward the mine head. At noon, they gather near the company store. 5 p.m., they return to housing. It's like watching a ghost shift. Except they're not ghosts, they're routines. Patterns. The town remembers how it operated, and something keeps running those patterns. Has anyone tried to stop it? I don't know, confront whatever it is. Marc closed the notebook. 2 guards tried. One in 1991, one in 2006. The first one tried to enter the mine head during the morning shift. He was found outside his trailer 3 days later. Hypothermic. Dehydrated. No memory of those 3 days. He quit immediately. The second guard set up cameras in the company store during noon break. The cameras were destroyed, smashed, cables cut, but he was unharmed. He lasted another month before requesting transfer. Marc looked at me seriously. The thing you need to understand is that whatever happens here, it's not hostile unless you interfere. The shifts run. The routines continue. Your job is to patrol during off hours, document anything unusual in this notebook, and stay out of buildings between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. That's when they're active. He left the next morning. Heritage Quebec sent a helicopter to pick him up. The only way in or out unless you want to hike 8 kilometers of logging road to reach the nearest drivable path. And I was alone. Alone with an abandoned mining town, a notebook full of warnings about shadow workers who still followed 1987 schedules, and a job that apparently required me not to secure the buildings during certain hours but rather to stay away from them, while something invisible but very much present continued going through motions of mining operations that ended 37 years ago. I wanted to dismiss it, wanted to think Marc had been isolated too long, that previous guards had created mythology around natural sounds in old buildings. But I'd seen his face. I heard the certainty in his voice. He wasn't telling stories. He was giving me protocols, survival information, the real job requirements that weren't in my contract but were apparently essential to staying safe in a place where the past hadn't quite figured out it was supposed to be finished. Tomorrow morning I'd find out if he was right. If at 7 a.m., I'd hear what every guard since 1988 had heard. If the shadows really did clock in for work at a mine that had been closed for longer than some of my co-workers had been alive, and whether I'd be smart enough to follow the unofficial protocols and stay out of their way, or whether I'd make the same mistake those two guards had made, trying to understand something that didn't want to be understood, only observed and respected and very carefully avoided during shift hours. Because if Marc was right, I wasn't guarding an empty town. I was guarding a town that still operated on a schedule, that still had workers, that still followed routines established decades ago. Workers who might not have flesh and bone anymore but who apparently still showed up for their shifts, still clocked in, still went through the motions of jobs they'd performed when the mine was open. And my job, my real job, was learning to coexist with employment that had outlasted the employer, with work that continued even though the workers had long since left, with shadows that still punched time cards in a town where time had stopped in 1987, but somehow hadn't noticed that nobody had told the work itself to stop showing up every single morning at precisely 7 a.m. I didn't sleep well that first night. Kept thinking about Marc's warnings, about the notebook filled with decades of observations from guards who'd all documented the same impossible things. I told myself I was anxious about a new posting, about being alone in a ghost town. Normal reactions. At 6:45 a.m. I was awake, made coffee. I stood at the trailer window looking out at Fermont-sur-Lac. The town was silent. Gray morning light made the empty buildings look like a photograph. The company store, the rows of worker housing, the church with its small steeple, and beyond them all the mine head, that massive concrete structure built into the mountainside, with the elevator shaft that descended into darkness. At exactly 7 a.m. I heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets. On gravel. The sound of people walking. I grabbed binoculars. I looked toward the housing area. Nothing. No people. But the sounds continued. Footsteps moving down the main street. Steady. Purposeful. The sound of a group walking together. Then I saw them. Not people. Shadows. Moving across the ground even though there was nothing casting them. They weren't attached to anything. Just shadow shapes moving in formation down the street. Human-shaped. Maybe 20 or 30 of them. Walking in groups of 2 or 3. Moving from the housing area toward the mine head. I watched for 5 minutes. The shadows moved with purpose. Some walked faster, some slower. Some seemed to pause and wait for others. Exactly like workers heading to a shift. By 7:15, they'd all reached the mine head building. The door, I could see it clearly through binoculars, didn't open. But the shadows disappeared inside. Just absorbed into the building. And then silence returned. I sat down, hands shaking. I just watched shadow people walk to work. Shadow people following a schedule from 1987. Shadow people who moved like they had weight and purpose and jobs to do. I pulled out the notebook Marc had left. Found the first entry again. 7 a.m. arrival. Shadows move from housing to mine head. Duration. 10 to 15 minutes. Do not approach during this time. I added my own entry. Day 10700 HRS. Observed approximately 20 to 30 shadow figures moving from the housing area to mine head. Movement patterns consistent with a group of workers. Shadows unattached to physical forms. Absorbed into mine head building by 07:15. No investigation attempted per protocol. At noon it happened again. I heard voices, muffled, coming from the direction of the company store. I went to a window with a clear view. Saw shadows gathered outside the building. Moving. Shifting. Like people on lunch break. Talking in groups. Some shadows seemed to sit on the steps. Others paced. For 30 minutes they stayed there. Then around 12:35 they dispersed. Some toward the mine head, some toward other buildings. By 12:40 silence again. At 5 p.m. the pattern reversed. Shadows emerged from the mine head, moved back up the street toward housing. Same formation, same purposeful movement. By 5:20, they'd all returned to the residential area and disappeared into the buildings. The workday was over. I just witnessed a full shift. Shadow workers maintained a schedule that had ended in 1987, operating like the mine was still open, still producing, still paying wages to workers who weren't there anymore, or who were there in some form I couldn't quite see. Shadow forms that retained the memory of daily routines so strongly that they continued performing them decades after the actual work had ended. Over the next week, I documented the pattern every day. 7 a.m. Shadows arrive at mine. Noon. Lunch gathering at the company store. 5 p.m. Shadows depart for housing. Always the same. Always precise. I also notice variations. Some shadows moved differently. One seemed to have a limp. Another walked slowly hunched over, like they retained not just the routine but individual characteristics, personal movements, the way specific workers had walked. I followed Marc's protocol, stayed away from buildings during active hours, did my patrols at 6 a.m. and 6:30 p.m., before and after the shadow shifts. Never tried to enter the mine head or company store while the shadows were there. Just documented, watched from a distance, respected the boundaries. In my second week, I found additional protocols in the notebook. More detailed rules developed by previous guards. Protocol 1. Never enter the mine head building between 7 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. This is active shift time. Guards who violate this experience disorientation and time loss. Protocol 2. Do not speak to or attempt to interact with the shadows. They do not acknowledge living presence unless provoked. Protocol 3. The company store is active during noon hour, 12 to 12:40 p.m. Avoid the building during this window. The sounds of doors, voices, and movement are normal. Protocol 4. Some shadows appear more solid than others. These are the permanents, shadows that appear every single day. Others are irregular, appearing only occasionally. Do not try to distinguish specific individuals. Protocol 5. The evening shift, 5 to 5:30 p.m., is the most dangerous time to be outside. Shadows are more reactive when leaving work. Stay in the trailer during this window. Protocol 6. On Sundays, no shifts occur. The town is completely silent. This is the safest day for building inspections and interior patrols. Protocol 7. Never, under any circumstances, attempt to descend into the mine shaft. Several guards report that the mine itself is more active than surface buildings. The underground is off-limits regardless of day or time. Each protocol had incident reports attached. Guards who tested them. Most violations ended with the guard requesting immediate transfer. One entry from 2003 was disturbing. Attempted to photograph shadows during noon break at the company store. The camera malfunctioned. All photos showed only static. That night, I heard footsteps outside the trailer from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Continuous pacing. The sound of someone walking in circles around my trailer. When I looked out the windows, nothing was visible. The sound continued regardless. Stopped at 4:08 a.m. Did not violate protocol again. I followed the rules exactly, but I also started noticing other things. Patterns within patterns. The shadows weren't random. They followed routines down to the minute. 7 a.m. arrival was always 20 to 30 shadows, but the number varied slightly by day. Mondays had more shadows, maybe 35. Fridays had fewer, maybe 25. like different workers had worked different schedules. Some worked 5 days. Some worked 6. The shadows maintained those individual schedules. I also noticed the permanence Marc had mentioned. For shadows that appeared every single workday, one walked with a pronounced limp. One was significantly taller than the others. One always walked alone, slightly behind the group. One always paused at the mine head entrance for a few seconds before entering, like checking something. These 4 never missed a shift. Were always present. Always in the same relative positions during the walk. By week 3, I documented enough to recognize individual movement patterns. The limping shadow always took the left side of the street. The tall shadow walked near the front. The solitary shadow took the rear. The pausing shadow was always third from the front. And I started thinking of them not as shadows but as residual workers. People who'd worked here so consistently, so routinely, that their patterns had somehow imprinted on the town. Ghost shifts running on autopilot. Memory workers continued jobs they performed for years, unable or unwilling to stop even after the mine closed and they'd left or died, or whatever had happened to the actual physical workers who'd once cast these shadows. In late May, I experienced Protocol 5 violation. I'd been working on a report and lost track of time. At 5:05 p.m., I stepped outside the trailer. I immediately felt wrong. The shadows were moving up the street from the mine head, but they were closer than usual. And one, the solitary shadow, turned toward me. Just slightly. A movement in my direction. I froze. The shadow paused. We were maybe 30 meters apart. For about 15 seconds, it stayed oriented toward me. Not approaching. Just aware. Acknowledging. Then it turned away and continued up the street with the others. I went back inside. Locked the door. Wrote in the notebook with shaking hands. Day 24 to 1,705 hours. Violated Protocol 5. Was outside during the evening shift departure. Solitary shadow showed awareness of my presence. Did not approach but clearly registered observer. No further interaction. Will not repeat the violation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moment. The shadow turned toward me. I felt seen. Recognized. Not threatened, it hadn't approached or acted hostile. But acknowledged. Like a worker noticing someone standing where they shouldn't be. A brief awareness that I'd crossed into their time. Their space. Their shift. By June, the isolation was affecting me. 2 months alone with shadow workers who followed 1987 schedules. 2 months watching impossible things happen with clockwork precision. 2 months maintaining the division between my documented observations and my official Heritage Quebec reports, which mention only routine patrols and building integrity assessments, never the shadow shifts that I logged in the unofficial notebook. I started having dreams. Same theme. Walking into the mine head during active hours. Descending the elevator shaft. Finding workers below. Real people. Still working. Still mining. Asking why I was there. Telling me visitors weren't allowed during shifts. Then I'd wake up. Uncertain whether it was a dream or warning. Whether my subconscious was processing what I'd seen, or whether something in the town was communicating the boundaries more clearly. I also started noticing changes in my own routine. I was unconsciously avoiding buildings during active hours, planning my meals around shift changes, thinking of the shadows not as phenomena but as co-workers, other people with schedules I needed to respect. Marc had warned me this would happen. After enough time, you stop seeing it as supernatural and start treating it as normal, as just another aspect of the job. The day shift does their work. I do mine. We stay out of each other's way. But I also felt lonely, more isolated than at previous postings, because at those sites I'd been alone with history. Here I was alone with ongoing operations. The town wasn't abandoned, it was occupied. Just not by anything I could talk to. Not by anything that acknowledged my presence unless I violated their space. I was the intruder. They were the legitimate workers. And that reversal, that understanding that I was the anomaly here, not them, created a psychological weight I hadn't experienced before. In mid-June, I made a mistake. Not a protocol violation, but a boundary test. I was at the Minehead building at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before shift starts. The door was unlocked. Heritage Quebec maintained access for me to do inspections on Sundays. I went inside. The building was exactly as you'd expect an abandoned mine operation to look. Elevator shaft. Control panels covered in dust. Old safety posters on walls. Time card racks. Empty slots where worker cards had once been punched. I took photos. Documented the interior. Then I checked my watch. 6:57 a.m. 3 minutes until 7. I should have left. The protocol was clear. But I wanted to see what happened. I wanted to witness the shift start from inside. So I stayed, positioned myself in a corner, waited. At exactly 7 a.m., everything changed. The temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. I could see my breath. The air pressure shifted. My ears popped. And I heard them. Footsteps outside. Multiple sets. Coming toward the building. The door didn't open. But I felt presence. Like the room had suddenly filled with people I couldn't see. Not just shadows, full presence. Wait. Massachusetts occupying space. I heard sounds. The clank of tools. Voices muffled, indistinct, but definitely voices. The elevator mechanism engaged. The cables moved. Like someone was operating the controls. The elevator descended. I heard it going down. Down into the mine shaft. With workers I couldn't see but could absolutely feel were there. I stayed frozen in my corner for 20 minutes. The temperature remained cold. The sounds continued. Tools. Movement. Activity. Then gradually silence returned. The temperature rose. Pressure normalized. The presence faded. I checked the elevator. It had ascended. Was back at ground level. Like someone had used it and returned it to its starting position. I left the building. Went back to my trailer. I sat there shaking for an hour. I'd experienced what the 1991 guard must have experienced. Except I'd been smart enough not to try to interact. Not to touch anything. Not to speak. Just observe. But I'd learned something. The shadows weren't just visual phenomena. Inside buildings during shift hours, they became something more. More substantial. More present. As if the buildings themselves amplified whatever imprint these workers had left behind. I documented it in the notebook. Day 680657 H's. Entered Minehead before shift start. Remained inside during 0700 arrival. Experienced temperature drop, pressure change, audible voices and tool sounds, elevator operation. No visual contact with entities. Presence strongly felt. Suggests shadows are more substantial within structures during active hours. Do not recommend others repeat this observation. I felt distinctly unwelcome. Was tolerated but not accepted. For the next week, I followed protocols exactly. No boundary testing. No building entries during active hours. The routine continued. 7 a.m. Shadows walk to work. Noon lunch break. 5 p.m. departure. I watched from an appropriate distance. Documented timings. Maintained the separation between observer and observed. But I also noticed something new. The solitary shadow, the one that walked alone, that had turned toward me during my Protocol 5 violation, started appearing in places it shouldn't. I'd see it near my trailer at odd hours. Not during shifts. maybe 9 p.m. or 6 a.m. Just standing, present, not approaching but definitely there, watching me, like it was ensuring I understood the boundaries, like a supervisor making sure I wasn't going to violate protocols again. I asked Heritage Quebec for a welfare check. They sent a helicopter with supplies and a field supervisor to verify I was okay. I told him I was fine. Didn't mention the shadows or shifts or the solitary watcher. Just said I was adjusting to the isolation. He left satisfied. But he also left a note. Your contract is up for renewal in September. Let us know if you want to extend or transfer. No judgment either way. Fermont-sur-Lac is a difficult posting. Most guards last one season. You've done well. In July, I found something that changed my understanding of everything. I was doing a Sunday inspection, the only day when shifts didn't run and buildings were safe to explore. I went through the administrative offices, found file cabinets, old personnel records that Heritage Quebec had archived but never digitized. I started reading, looking for names, for workers who'd been here in the 1980s. Found an incident report from 1984. A worker named Jean-Marc Duchesne had been killed in a mine collapse, crushed by falling rock in Tunnel 7. Fatal. Immediate. The company paid benefits to his family, held a memorial, but his time card remained active for 3 months after his death. Someone kept punching it. 7 a.m. arrivals, 5 p.m. departures. The company investigated, found no explanation, eventually removed the card. The punching stopped. Found another record. 1986. Marie-Claude Fontaine suffered a stroke at her home, died in hospital, but workers reported seeing her shadow in the company store during lunch breaks for weeks afterward, always in the same spot where she'd eaten her meals. Eventually, the sightings stopped, or people stopped reporting them. I found 6 cases. Workers who'd died before the mine closed, who'd worked here so long, so consistently, that their routines apparently persisted after death. Shadow forms that continued showing up for shifts they could no longer physically work. And I understood. The shadows weren't memories of all workers. They were specific workers. People who died while employed, who'd worked here so devotedly that even death hadn't ended their shifts. The mine closed in 1987, but these workers had died between 1978 and 1986. Their shifts had started years before closure, and had never stopped. The permanence, those 4 shadows I'd been tracking, matched records. Jean-Marc Duchesne had walked with a limp from an earlier injury. He was the limping shadow. Marie-Claude Fontaine had been tall, nearly 180 centimeters. She was the tall shadow. The solitary shadow matched Paul Tremblay, a man who'd worked 30 years at the mine, known for being quiet, always keeping to himself. The pausing shadow matched records of Dennis Carpentier, a safety inspector who'd checked equipment every morning before descending. These weren't random imprints. These were specific people, dead workers who'd loved their jobs, or hated them but worked them anyway. So completely that death hadn't stopped their routines. They were still clocking in, still descending into the mine, still taking lunch breaks, still following schedules burned into them by years of repetition. The mine was closed, but for them work continued, would always continue, because work had been their life, and death hadn't managed to retire them. I spent the rest of July documenting this, cross-referencing personnel records with shadow patterns. Every permanent matched a deceased worker. The irregulars, shadows that appeared only some days, might be living workers whose patterns were less intense, or workers who died but hadn't established strong enough routines. I couldn't be sure, but the pattern was clear. Fermont-sur-Lac wasn't abandoned. It was a workplace for the dead. A mine operation staffed entirely by workers whose employment had outlasted their lives. In August, my contract renewal came up. Heritage Quebec offered extension. Same terms, same isolation, same unofficial duties of documenting shadows and respecting shift schedules at a mine that officially closed but unofficially never stopped operating. I thought about it for days, about whether I could handle another year of watching the dead go to work, of maintaining boundaries with workers who died before I was born, living with the knowledge that death doesn't necessarily mean the end of employment, not if you work somewhere long enough and hard enough that your routine becomes what you are rather than what you do. I accepted the extension, told myself it was the money, the peaceful isolation, but I also knew another reason. I'd become invested in them, in Jean-Marc's limp, in Marie-Claude's height, in Paul's solitude, in Dennis's morning safety checks. They were more than shadows now. They were coworkers, people I saw every day, who maintained their routines with dignity, who never bothered me as long as I respected theirs, who taught me that work, however humble, can become so much a part of identity that it persists beyond death, that employment can be eternal if you commit to it completely enough. My replacement for next season asked about the posting. I showed them the unofficial notebook, explained the protocols, told them about the shifts. They looked skeptical. Do you really expect me to believe dead miners still show up for work? I thought about how to answer. Finally said, you don't have to believe. You just have to be respectful. They'll be here every morning at 7 whether you believe in them or not. Your job is to document and stay out of their way. Do that and you'll be fine. Try to prove or disprove them and I gestured at the notebook. Read the incident reports. Learn from guards who tested boundaries and regretted it. They read. Their skepticism faded. They accepted the protocols. And I realized this was how it worked, how the unofficial knowledge passed down. Each guard thought it was nonsense until experiencing it, then becoming a believer, then passing that belief to the next guard. An unbroken chain of witnesses maintaining respect for workers who died decades ago, but never stopped working. I'm still at Fermont-sur-Lac, coming up on my second year. I've documented over 500 shifts, logged variations in shadow numbers, tracked patterns that even the shadows themselves probably don't consciously follow, they just do because routine is what remains when everything else is gone. Sometimes I imagine what would happen if Heritage Quebec sold the property. If developers came and demolished the buildings, would the shadows still show up? Walk to a mine head that no longer exists? Or would that finally release them? Let them understand that work is over, that shift's ended, that they can clock out for the last time. I don't know, but I know this. Every morning at 7 a.m., Jean-Marc and Marie-Claude and Paul and Dennis walk down that street, descend into that mine, do work that produces nothing but satisfies something in them that death couldn't extinguish. And I watch, document, respect, because they're not haunting this town. They're working on it. There's a difference. Hauntings are aimless, distressed. These shadows have purpose, routine, jobs they're still performing decades after retirement, and death should have ended their employment. The mine closed in 1987, but nobody told the workers. Nobody explained that shifts were over. So they keep coming, keep clocking in, keep doing work that matters to them even if it matters to no one else. And I, living among the dead, guarding a town where employment outlasted life itself, have learned that the most persistent thing humans create isn't art or buildings or even children. It's a habit, routine, the grooves we wear into our lives by doing the same thing every day until the doing becomes who we are. Until we can't stop even when there's no longer any reason to continue. Until death itself becomes just another day off, unwelcome, unacknowledged, Insufficient to break the pattern of showing up at 7 a.m. because that's what workers do. Because that's what we've always done. Because work for some people isn't just what they do. It's what they are. And in Fermont-sur-Lac, what they are hasn't stopped being. Won't stop. Can't stop. We'll keep punching that metaphysical time card every morning until... What? Until the mountain crumbles? Until time itself ends? Until someone finally officially tells them that the shift is over and they can go home? I don't think anyone has that authority. I don't think there is an authority that can release workers who've committed to work this completely. So they continue. And I watch. And document. And respect. Because in the end, that's all I can do. All anyone can do when witnessing employment that death couldn't terminate. Work that outlasted the workplace. Shifts that will run forever because the workers never learned or never accepted that forever isn't how long anyone should have to work. But for Jean-Marc and Marie-Claude and Paul and Dennis and however many others are down there in the tunnels I can't see, forever is exactly how long the shift lasts. And they'll keep showing up. Keep doing the work. Keep being what they were and are and always will be. Miners at a mine that closed decades ago but somehow impossibly never stopped operating. Never stopped needing workers. Never stopped running shifts. The shadows still clock in for work at Fermont-sur-Lac. Every day. 7 a.m. Like clockwork. Because for them there is no retirement. No resignation. No end of employment. There's only the shift. The routine. The work. And it continues. Will always continue. Whether anyone watches or not. Whether anyone documents it or not. Whether anyone believes in it or not. The work goes on. The shifts run. The shadows maintain their schedules. And I, the guard assigned to watch over all of this, have learned that the most haunting thing about abandoned places isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of what people left behind. Not objects, not buildings, but patterns, habits, routines so deeply ingrained that they persist independently of the people who established them. That continues running like programs no one knows how to shut down. Like shifts that forgot they were supposed to end when the mine closed. And so they didn't end. They just kept going. Keep going. I will keep going. Forever. Or until something finally tells them it's time to clock out. And I don't think that something exists. I think these shadows will be walking to work long after I'm gone. Long after Heritage Quebec abandons the site. Long after the buildings collapse. They'll still be there. Still following the schedule. Still showing up at 7. Because that's what they do. That's what they've always done. That's what they are. Workers. Eternal. Dedicated. Unable or unwilling to accept that the work is finished. And in a strange way I respect that. Admire it even. The devotion. The commitment. The inability to quit something they believed in enough to continue beyond death. It's horrifying. But it's also somehow beautiful. A testament to human routine. To the power of habit. To the fact that who we are is built from what we do repeatedly. And these workers did their jobs so repeatedly that they became their jobs. Are still their jobs. Will always be their jobs. Mining zinc from tunnels that played out 37 years ago. Following schedules that ended decades before. Clocking in for shifts that have no end. Because in Fermont-sur-Lac, the work never stopped. The workers just stopped being alive. But that distinction between life and death matters less than you'd think when you've witnessed what I've witnessed. When you've documented hundreds of shifts performed by people who died before you were born. Who'll be performing shifts after you die. Because for them, death was just an inconvenience. A change in circumstance. Not a retirement. Not an ending. Just another condition they had to work through. And so they do. Every morning. 7 a.m. Like clockwork. Forever.